In December 2019, China notified the World Health Organization of several cases of human respiratory illness, a disease later named COVID-19. The virus causing this disease is known as severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2. The disease spreads through small droplets that are expelled from the nose or mouth when a person with COVID-19 coughs or exhales. Therefore, standing close to someone who is infected can put you at risk. These droplets can land on your hand and be transmitted through something as simple as a handshake, if afterwards you touch your eyes, nose, or mouth, the so-called T-zone. The virus is known to survive on different types of surfaces, so touching these contaminated surfaces and then touching your T-zone brings a high risk of infection.
Fear. It's a basic, truly primal instinct. Proof? The way most of us feel right now. And it, too, is contagious. Our cover story this morning is reported by David Pogue.
Julie Beitman has been my friend and neighbor for over 15 years. But I've never seen her like this.
I'm very upset about this. I'm upset. I watch the news around the clock, and that's all I think about.
Has it brought you to tears?
It has.
Like everybody else, she's doing everything in her power to avoid getting infected by the 2020 coronavirus.
I've never touched a doorknob or a handle. My boots are all worn out on the toe.
You're flushing toilets with your foot?
Always. Always.
Oh, here's your bunker. Like so many other Americans, Julie has stocked up on supplies. She's even made her own stylish face masks.
That'll protect me. It'll cover from the top to the bottom.
Even before the coronavirus was considered a pandemic, Julie was taking all the rational, recommended steps. But fear is also making people do irrational things, sometimes dangerous things.
Somebody is going to get hurt!
Panic buying toilet paper. Attacking people just for looking Asian.
This is amazing.
Buying unproven home remedies. And considering gargling with bleach? But we are supposed to be the rational animal.
We're supposed to be the rational animal, but there's a lot going on in your head that's kind of under your conscious radar.
David Desino is a psychology professor at Northeastern University who studied how fear can drive us batty. Under what circumstances do our brains run away with the fear?
So they run away with the fear if we don't have accurate information. Like that guy over there on the subway, he looks like he's going to sneeze and like he's sweaty. Does he have the coronavirus or not? I don't know. When you don't know the information, it gives a lot more range for your emotions to fill in the blank.
Right. So Mr. Spock from Star Trek, he would have an accurate assessment of the virus risk.
Yes, he would have an accurate assessment of the virus risk.
The stress circuit is really there to biologically and mentally, physically help us respond to stress and to help us adapt and survive in the world.
Rajita Sinha is a Yale psychiatry professor and director of the Yale Interdisciplinary Stress Center. She says that 3 factors can make fear spiral out of control.
The first is if it is unpredictable.
Right.
Right? And the second is if it's uncontrollable. Okay? And the third is if it's sustained and chronic.
So how then does this virus fit into these 3 categories?
Yes. So unfortunately, we have all 3 classes of problematic stress.
You mentioned this issue of control. So is there a sense that some of the wilder things that people are doing, gargling with bleach, spraying Chinese-looking people on the subway, are people trying to get control?
Absolutely. We go to the extreme sometimes to gain control, to have a sense that we can do something about it.
I took a lot of naps. I played on my phone. I just killed time best I could.
Mark Jorgensen was a passenger on the Diamond Princess, the cruise ship that quarantined its passengers for 2 weeks in Japan. So, how was your cruise?
Yeah. Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?
At some point, Mark and his wife got the virus. He's now quarantined at his home in St. George, Utah.
I have never had and continue to not have any symptoms. Not even slight cold symptoms, nothing.
But Jorgensen and his wife have experienced irrational fear in another form. Hostile comments online from other people. What sorts of things were people saying out there?
Just let's find out where he is and go get him, and let's, and don't you dare come back to St. George, and you'll regret it if you come to St. George. And
They were threatening you guys?
with the amount of fear this had generated, I should have known that some people would be fearful, and often the way people react to fear is to get angry.
Now, we can't help what we feel. Our brains evolved to respond to dangers that we sense around us. But Desino says that we're now sensing danger around the clock.
Breaking news on coronavirus.
On our screens.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing. We want to be informed. But we kind of need a software update, right? Our brain hasn't evolved to be able to adjust for what we're seeing in the media versus what's really in our local environment.
Unfortunately, she did die.
Right.
Of course, it doesn't help that virus movies like Contagion and Outbreak.
If one of them's got it, then 10 of them have got it now. There will be panic the likes of which we have never seen.
Have painted a horrific picture in our minds. And social media, like Facebook and Twitter, only make matters worse.
The other thing we know about emotions is they're contagious. On social media, everybody's talking about the threat of coronavirus. Not only am I going to think that that's more frequent, but I'm going to see that fear as a rational signal from them. And it's going to make me want to respond accordingly.
Remember, stress, anxiety, and fear can be useful. They can drive us to taking healthy actions. The trick is to recognize when our fear has gone off the rails.
I just want one.
And become dangerous. Because, as Professor Desino says,
right now we're in a perfect storm because we all feel anxious because of what we're seeing. But most of us can't think like epidemiologists. Most of us can't think statistically. And so that fear is filling in the blanks and making us think everything is more dangerous.
There is a war for the mind, unseen to us, but its effects have done what wars and calamities have failed to accomplish in times past. Whether you're aware of it or not, you have been affected. You may be healthy, you may be taking precautions, but our minds have been filled with a degree of fear that is catastrophic. And could it be that this fear is being used as a tool to control the masses?
Let's talk about classical conditioning first. In the 1890s, a Russian physiologist named Ivan Pavlov did some really famous experiments on dogs. He showed dogs some food and rang a bell at the same time. After a while, the dogs would associate the bell with the food. They would learn that when they heard the bell, they would get fed. Eventually, just ringing the bell made the dogs salivate. They learned to expect food at the sound of a bell. You see, under normal conditions, the sight and smell of food causes a dog to salivate. We call the food an unconditioned stimulus, and we call salivation an unconditioned response. Nobody trains a dog to salivate over some steak. However, when we pair an unconditioned stimulus like food with something that was previously neutral, like the sound of a bell, that neutral stimulus becomes a conditioned stimulus. And so classical conditioning was discovered. We see how this works with animals, but how does it work with humans? In exactly the same way. Let's say that one day you go to the doctor to get a shot. She says, "Don't worry, this won't hurt a bit," and then gives you the most painful shot you've ever had. A few weeks later, you go to the dentist for a checkup. He starts to put a mirror in your mouth to examine your teeth, and he says, "Don't worry, this won't hurt a bit." Even though you know the mirror won't hurt, you jump out of the chair and run screaming from the room. When you went to get a shot, the words, "this won't hurt a bit," became a conditioned stimulus when they were paired with the pain of the shot, the unconditioned stimulus, which was followed by your conditioned response of getting the heck out of there. Classical conditioning in action.
So today we have the coronavirus as an unconditional stimulus. An unconditional stimulus is any stimulus that naturally or automatically triggers a specific response. And this natural response, in light of the coronavirus, is fear. And this response is called an unconditional response. And it is defined as an unlearned response that occurs naturally to an unconditional stimulus.
Oh my God!
It is only natural for an unconditional response to be produced from an unconditional stimulus. Based off the work of Pavlov, if a neutral stimulus is paired with an unconditional stimulus, the result is a conditioned stimulus, and this results in a conditioned response. A conditioned stimulus is a stimulus to which an organism or individual has learned to make a response. It is a product of learned behavior, whereas a conditioned response is an automatic response that is established by training or exposure to a neutral stimulus. It also means a behavior that does not come naturally, but must be learned by pairing a neutral stimulus with a potent stimulus. Since the outbreak of this pandemic, we are being bombarded via the media with neutral stimulus. And as we just learned, these neutral stimulus, in conjunction with an unconditional stimulus, leads to conditioning. Therefore, we are being conditioned to trust no one and to view everyone as a potential enemy, as they too may have the virus. We must therefore ask ourselves, is this an ingenious plan from a master strategist? And does the Bible give any insight to this? If you want to know, stay tuned.